Hello, this is a video on the first stage of photosynthesis, referred to as the light-dependent reactions. The light-dependent reactions take place at the thylakoid. So in your responses, you should link those two things together, really. Just refer to light-dependent reactions at the thylakoid. Now the diagram I'm going to draw here is a combination, I suppose, of the diagrams in your notes that are on page 18 and 19. I've tried to combine the two things together, but I hope that won't be too confusing. Okay, I will try to refer to the different stages as the numbers referring to the diagrams in your notes. As I go through. Okay, just before we get to that though, let's just remind ourselves of not just the thylakoid, but the rest of the chloroplast. So chloroplast, firstly, it has a double membrane surrounding the chloroplast. That's sort of a hangover from when it was a prokaryotic cell that was engulfed by a larger cell 4.3 billion years ago or so. Okay, also some other evidence that a chloroplast is sort of a remnant of a prokaryote are these things. It contains its own circular DNA and its own 70S ribosomes. So you might remember 70S are those smaller ribosomes that you find in prokaryotes. Eukaryotes contain 80S ribosomes. Now those ribosomes, they may be free in this solution inside the chloroplast, which is called the stroma, or they may be bound to membranes. Okay, so like I said, I've mentioned the stroma, which is the solution present inside the chloroplast. We also have these stacked shapes which are called granum. So these are stacked thylakoids. You can see a thylakoid at the top there. Now the thylakoid is surrounded by a thylakoid membrane, and that's what we're going to show with the light-dependent reactions in a moment. If you have one stack referred to as a granum, many stacks of thylakoids are grana. So surrounded by a thylakoid membrane, and then inside that thylakoid membrane is what's called the thylakoid space. And we'll refer back to that in a moment. Okay, so if we begin with the light-dependent reactions. Now, sometimes confusingly for students, the light-dependent reactions begin at photosystem 2. I think that was just the order that they were discovered in. So photosystem 1 was discovered first. I think that's the reason, I might be wrong there. But anyway, within this thing, this photosystem 2, is chlorophyll. It has this sort of auxiliary structure around it that acts like a bit like a funnel, and its purpose is to direct light and light energy down through these structures and into the chlorophyll found in here. So light energy or you may know that light energy as, sometimes it's referred to as photons. You'll have to ask a physicist why, but it's something to do with light being a particle and a wave. Very confusing. Anyway, that light energy is absorbed by chlorophyll. Chlorophyll contains the metal magnesium, and when chlorophyll absorbs that light, the energy is used to excite the electrons in the magnesium. And the outcome of that is those electrons jump to a higher energy level and actually escape the chlorophyll altogether. So 2 electrons escape the chlorophyll, meaning that that chlorophyll is oxidized, and specifically the magnesium. Okay, so the magnesium has lost those 2 electrons. We call this process photo, referring to the light energy, ionization. So ionization is the gain or loss of electrons. In this case, chlorophyll loses those 2 electrons. Now those electrons are passed on to some electron carriers in the membrane of the thylakoid. Now all of this is taking place in the membrane of the thylakoid, and I said that I've sort of combined 2 diagrams, the one in your notes on page 18 and the one on page 19. Okay, because the next stage is an example of chemiosmotic theory. Now you might remember chemiosmosis from the oxidative phosphorylation reactions or stage of respiration. Now very similar to that, we've got another example of an electron transport chain. So the electrons, these electrons that have been ionized, that have escaped the chlorophyll. Now these electrons are, we can sometimes refer to them as high energy electrons. They've gained all of that energy from the light. Now they get passed on to a series of carriers in the membrane. And one of the functions of these proteins in the membrane is to use the energy from the electrons to actively transport, how am I going to do this? Protons, hydrogen ions, from the stroma, so we have the stroma on this side, and into the thylakoid space. The thylakoid space, I've shown that, I won't write that all in, on the other side of the membrane. So those electrons pass from one carrier, okay, so each time they pass from one carrier to the next, that carrier becomes oxidized, and oxidation releases a bit of energy. So those electrons release energy at each of those carriers, enabling the active transport of protons from the stroma and into the thylakoid space. I'll just separate that there. Okay. The effect of that then eventually is to create a high concentration of protons inside the thylakoid, in the thylakoid space. So we've got this high concentration of protons, an electrochemical gradient, electrical because they've all got a charge, chemical because they're protons. The effect of that then is we've created this higher concentration of protons in the thylakoid and a lower concentration in the stroma. So next, you may remember this, the protons will then diffuse down the concentration gradient and through a channel protein to begin with, and then through ATP synthase. So this is ATP synthase, the enzyme which is responsible for phosphorylating ADP, an inorganic phosphate, adding that inorganic phosphate to ADP to produce our first product, ATP. So the first really useful product of the light-dependent reactions is this ATP, all by that chemiosmotic theory that's described in on page 17, 18 and 19 in the notes. Okay, at this stage, those electrons have lost some of their energy. Okay, and they pass on to, now, like I said, it's a little bit confusing. They pass on to photosystem 1. Now, the reason I've drawn photosystem 1 and photosystem 2 at sort of slightly different levels is to represent that that photosystem 1 has a slightly higher energy. So those electrons have more energy than they did when they left or when they were in photosystem 2, but they've lost some of it. So photosystem 2, just like photosystem 1, is also able to absorb light energy, photons. Chlorophyll is in the middle, so it also contains magnesium. And you can probably guess what's going to happen next. And you'd be right. I'm just going to rub that bit out there. Look. Magnesium is ionized again. So we have photoionization. So light energy, photons, ionize the magnesium. And those electrons, I'm just going to have to rub out the stroma a bit there, are photoionized again. So we have that second photoionization of the chlorophyll found in photosystem 2. Now this time, these electrons, rather than going through another electron transport chain, this time these electrons are used to reduce a coenzyme called, what colour should I draw this? Just look back. NADP. Okay, so similar to the NAD that we learnt about in respiration, but this time it's called NADP. We can imagine that P stands for plants, photosynthesis, or phosphate. Okay, now you're probably thinking, well, for the reduction of NADP, okay, accepting electrons is a good start, but it also needs to accept protons. You may also think, well, this can't go on for too long because the electrons have been lost at this stage. So there is a second or third, or there is another reaction going on at the same time. So down at, and you can see this more easily perhaps on the diagram on page 19, there is a reaction going on down here that involves the splitting of water. So I'll just draw that down there. And this is associated with photosystem 2 primarily. Now water is split using energy from light. Okay, so those photons, the energy from light, is used to split the water into protons. So we've got 2 protons and electrons, 2 electrons, and also half, a molecule of oxygen. Obviously this is going to happen twice and you get a full molecule of oxygen. But this is the oxygen produced from photosynthesis. When you think of that GCSE level equation formula for For photosynthesis, we know we get those 6 moles of 6 moles of oxygen being released, and there's half of one there. Okay, so the purpose of this process, this is called photolysis. Photo, again, because of the light energy. Lysis means to split. So photolysis is a splitting of water using light energy. Now, the electrons, we'll start with those. These electrons replace the electrons lost from photosystem 2, from the chlorophyll present in photosystem 2. Okay, so those electrons are replacing those. Then eventually, those electrons will be photoionized again. The protons are used to also reduce NADP. So NADP accepts these 2 electrons from photosystem 1 and 2 protons from photolysis. Okay, so that NADP becomes reduced NADP, or sometimes referred to as NADPH. Okay, and it's this reduced NADP is the second really important, sorry for the squeaks, second really important product of the light-dependent reactions. So our products, we'll just make a note there. We have ATP from the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis, reduced NADP from the reduction of that NADP, electrons from photosystem 1, protons from photolysis of water, and oxygen. The ATP and the NADPH are important because these pass on to the next stage of photosynthesis, which is called the light independent reactions. In my next video, I'll explain how that ATP and NADPH are used. The oxygen, well, it diffuses out of the chloroplast. Perhaps some of it might be used in respiration. If not, it will be used, or it will diffuse out of the cell, out through the stomata, and into the atmosphere. Okay, so all of the oxygen in our atmosphere is the result of any excess oxygen is released from these photosynthetic cells. Now, I'm just going to add one little bit to this about the importance of these reactions, and I can't underestimate or understate the importance of these reactions. Right. We know that all biological molecules contain essentially 3 elements. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The hydrogen, so all hydrogen in all biological molecules, the vast majority anyway, not those that, anyway, all hydrogen in all biological molecules is a product of this photolysis. Now we'll talk a bit more about this in the next video, but one really important feature of the light-dependent reactions is it provides, well, the energy, firstly from light, it captures that, and it can use that energy in the electrons that are in NADPH and in the ATP. That energy is then going to be stored in biological molecules later, but it also is the source of all of these hydrogen atoms that then eventually will make up biological molecules. Lastly, the importance of oxygen. Well, it provides, well, the light-dependent reactions provide all of the oxygen necessary for oxidative phosphorylation at the end of aerobic respiration. So when you come to do your essays, having a good understanding of the light-dependent reactions is excellent for those 2 or 3 sentences that you'll need at the end of each of your essay paragraphs on importance. Okay, I'll touch more on that in the next video. Thanks very much.